Okay, today we're going to talk about under attack, I guess, is one of the things. And some days I feel like I'm under attack, and because some of the things that get sent my way by people who apparently have nothing better to do than to tell you everything that you don't do right. And you don't need to do that. I have a wife, and no, she doesn't do that all the time. She rarely does it. So, but yeah, I know. If anybody wants to take me out for lunch, I'll need a ride home. And but it's the world seems to be in a state of madness from the way that I look, just with all the things floating around about the election and this and that, and everybody fighting and Christians fighting and all this stuff, and it gets to be it's a bit much. I'll make a comment about that later on. So we talk each week about the convergence of events and the things that are going on that seem to indicate that we're near this period of time where eventually the Lord will return and set up his kingdom, and that will be, I think, every day Christians are getting, I call it, the Lord is decoupling us from the world. He's making us realize that this world system really holds nothing for us. That doesn't mean that we're not part of the world until the Lord returns and we shouldn't do things, but I think he's turning us to a point where we're going to be totally dependent on him. He's going to do the same thing with the Jewish people when they're under oppression in the last half of the 70th week. He's going to bring them to a point where they have to make a decision. And I think he's doing that with the church as well during the same period of time. So this week there was a cyber attack on the East Coast. It started on the East Coast. It eventually spread to cover a large portion of the country. And there's tremendous speculation out there about it. For about as many people there are that know about it, there are about that many authoritative opinions. Everybody's pretty sure that they're right. They know exactly who did it. You know, it was us, it was the Russians, it was the WikiLeaks, people who support WikiLeaks, it was China, it was, you know, so we'll find out. You can't look at a map, I don't think, my understanding is, of how packets are flowing on the internet, that they're coming from a certain part to going from here to there, to know that that's where the attack originated from, because they may have planted some kind of virus or Trojan on those computers that respond all at the same time to send out these packets of information to deny everything. So today we're going to look a little bit about moral, cultural things, and we'll look at geopolitics for most of the time that I'm going to be speaking. A verse, I taught a class this week. It was done in connection with Bradley University on eschatology. So I'm a little bit behind on my preparation for this morning because I had to prepare and teach that class and get materials together for that. But I think there were about 36 people there, and there was no restrictions on anything that I could talk about or teach. So I don't know if it was an official university class, but the Bradley University did provide all of the infrastructure to allow me to do it over Skype and, you know, transmit my slides and all of that. So one of the things I talked about was the pattern aspect of eschatology, that what's happened before will happen again. I saw a number of things, for example, this week about what's going on in the church, the unbiblical nature of some of the most popular worship music out there. People are analyzing it. The theology is just very bad. It might be catchy tunes. Other things that are going on in the church, even look, there's one person who I really oppose in the presidential campaign. I think that's obvious, who she is. And I see a lot of Christians supporting her. I have no clue how they can do that, okay? I just don't. And I understand when people say you can't support Trump either. I mean, I get that, okay? But I did kind of take a quick review of American history, and I don't really find any saints that have run for the President of the United States. And I'm not sure why this time it's the rhetoric and everything is just amped up on hyperdrive. And as I've said, vote your conscience, pray about it, vote your conscience, and stop with the nonsense that you're sinning if you vote in this election. That's just not good reasoning. So we have this pattern, but we see this thing, and we know that things were going on. For example, in Ezekiel chapter 8 and 9, Ezekiel's given a tour of the temple, and as he's given a tour of the temple, he's shown these abominations. That's what the person, the angel escorting him through his tour of the temple, his vision of the temple, what's going on in Jerusalem while he's there in Babylon. And every place they go in the temple, it gets worse and worse. The abominations get worse and worse. And I believe that that is a pattern, a picture of how the church will be in the end times. God dealt very severely with Judah, the kingdom of Judah, and what they were allowed going on in God's holy temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. I don't think that, by and large, the professing church will get off without a similar judgment as we get closer to the end. It's just inevitable. By the same token, there are other patterns in Scripture. For example, in Luke chapter 17, it talks about a pattern of what it's going to be like at the end. And it says this, likewise also it was in the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. And we know from 2 Peter chapter 2 that Lot was quite distressed about what was going on and delivered just Lot. It's interesting. You know how Lot lived, but Lot is described in 2 Peter 2 as just or righteous. And he certainly, if you read the narrative of his life story, he was far from perfect. So maybe there's something else going on there that makes him righteous. But he was vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them and seeing and hearing vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. I know that, and Lot was rescued, taken out of there, just before God's judgment, really severe judgment, poured out on Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plain. We will eventually get rescued. I have no doubt about that. But the pattern of the Scripture is it may be pretty bad before we go. But God's faithful, and He'll be true to His word. So all of these things going on with the homosexuality and gay agenda and gay marriage and everything and transgenderism, we're not even a year and a half removed from the Obergefell decision. And look at the things that we're dealing with. And the culture has changed. And while I know that people are hopeful and optimistic that we can unring the bell, so to speak, I'm not optimistic that it will happen. And so we need to trust in the Lord and learn how to deal with living in a world like this, as tough as that may be. For example, here's Scotland. Now, Scotland has a rich Christian tradition, and this is from the New York Times this morning. Scots embrace a diversity once shunned. Gay clout in politics marks a cultural shift. And now Scotland, many people in Scotland tout themselves as having the gayest parliament in the world. And it's now a thing that is celebrated. So in that sense, while we need to fight, the culture war on that aspect may be lost. And look, the only answer for anyone is faith in Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of their sins. Not a half gospel, by the way, and I don't have time to go into some of the things. The pastor from New York, Hillsong, was on Oprah this week. Maybe some of you saw that, and I have the clip, but I don't have time to go through it this morning. I'll try to cover that next week. He essentially just said, God loves everybody. And and while some of the things he said were true, it was at best a half gospel. And a half gospel is really no gospel. So I would encourage no true pastor to go on Oprah, because they never, what's the term, close the deal. They get sort of wrapped up in how cool it is to be interviewed by Oprah, I guess. I don't know. It's not on my bucket list, but and I hope I would have the wisdom to say no if it ever happened. Okay, I want to give you some good news though. We had this transgender bathroom case. There were about 10 schools from 10 states filed suit down in Texas. I talked about it a couple months ago. And the judge issued a ruling, and he said that the state of Texas was the lead plaintiff, and they sued the Department of Justice, or the government, the United States of America, because they were issuing these regulations based on a law that had the word sex in it. And they say, well, the word there, sex, is in the statute. It is ambiguous, and it could mean born male or female, but it could mean sexual preference and that type of thing. And the federal judge in Texas said that's nonsense. And in his ruling back in August, he said the court concludes Section 106.33 is not ambiguous. It cannot be disputed that the plain meaning of the term sex, as used in 106.33 when it was enacted by the Department of Education following passage of Title IX, meant the biological and anatomical differences between male and female students as determined at birth. And the federal government was saying, well, but that word doesn't mean what it used to mean. And the judge's point was, this is called the postmodern approach to statutory interpretation. And look, I'm a lawyer. I deal with this type of nonsense all the time. People, it's clear what a word means, and then they want to litigate over it to say that it didn't really mean what they meant then, because if they had thought of other things, they would have assigned a different meaning to it. It's just, and this is what the federal government does now. They go into court and they say, we don't care what Congress enacted, we want to do this. And this judge, bless his heart, stood up to him and said, no, you're not going to do that. So he issued an injunction. So now what does the federal government do? Does the federal government say, okay, we'll appeal the case and we'll live up to the injunction? No, they don't live up to the injunction. Why? Because, well, that's just a judge. And, look, if it had been another judge ruling the other way, do you think they would have accepted the ruling? Of course they would. So, but they're going to appeal. And so they said, well, the ruling only applies to the states from which the 10 states from which schools who were plaintiffs in the case came from. And so they issued a thing, and then the judge issued an order the other day, I guess it was Tuesday, and it said this: accordingly, the court clarifies that the preliminary injunction applies nationwide. Okay? So they're appealing it, of course. It's obvious that they are. But I'm thankful for a judge who did the right thing. And a lot of judges do, by the way. Here's kind of a troubling thing from the Irish Times. A lady has written a book called The Moral Case for Abortion. And she says, we really can't judge the people who are doing this abortion. Yeah, it's killing. It's killing a human being. But this is her justification. Whatever the fetus experiences, it is not human life as we know it, with its joys and sorrows, fears, hopes, and expectations. It knows nothing of itself nor of others, and others know nothing of it. You tell that to the parents that I know, many of them who've had miscarriages, the women who've had miscarriages, that that's not nothing. This is the state of the world, that she writes a book called The Moral Case for Abortion, and a paper in Ireland publishes it without a lot of negative commentary about the immoral nature of her argument and her case. And that's just another indication of the way the world is. Now, I almost put a clip in. I want you to know what I go through to do this, okay? I listened to a 45-minute speech of his twice, okay? Now, I better get a crown for that or something, because I think I would rather be waterboarded for 45 minutes twice than that. But he was out defending his wife and said, that he said, well, we got to have this. I can't do an imitation of his, but because if I do, I fear I might get struck by lightning, just because they might mistake me for him. He said, we got to allow immigration, because where do all you old people on Social Security think you're going to get people to pay you? Well, in a sense, he's right. Okay? But, so he just says, throw open the floodgates. Let them come in. And they are coming in, by the way. I think there were 52,000 illegal alien children that came in through the Mexican border so far this year that have been, it's the immigration system, they call it catch and release. They catch them, they take their name, and then they let them go to where they were going. Sometimes they even bust them there. The other thing he talked about was, Hillary said some things about she'd like to get rid of coal, or Obama said he'd like to get rid of coal, and they're doing a lot to do that. My firm represents some power companies, and the regulations are just incredibly onerous and burdensome. But here's Bill's explanation for that. But so has coal country. And most of them are supporting Hillary's opponent because they've been told that President Obama and those of us who think that something has to be done about climate change are responsible for the loss of those jobs. Well, guess what? By and large, you are responsible for the loss of those jobs. I saw an article, I don't know, I think it was an editorial in the New York Times this morning that said we've had 3 debates and they barely mentioned climate change. Good. Stop wasting our time. I love to play golf, as you know. And I've often said, if I'm playing in shirt sleeves in January in Ohio, I am okay with that. Okay? I really am. Now look, Florida, I'm not a big fan of Florida. I know you have some trouble down there, and I love all you people, but, move. That's what everybody does. Well, I'm going to get mail about that one. So, Cityscope has this. This is just briefly the Habitat 3 New Urban Agenda. This is a thing about putting in these goals for governing urban areas all over the world. This is a UN project. And this paragraph kind of struck at me. Beyond the specific technocratic solutions of economics and governance, several core ideals will form the ideological underpinnings of the new urban agenda. Initial documents suggest that, for instance, democratic development and respect for human rights will feature prominently, as will the relationship between the environment and urbanization. And what do they mean by this? They want to control everything. Why? Because they think they're smarter than everybody else. They're technocrats. By the way, go check out Patrick Wood's, our friend Patrick Wood's website about technocracy. and you'll get an idea of some of the things that are being planned and pushed under the UN in this regard. This is an editorial. The next one is an editorial in this morning's New York Times defending Hillary Clinton. I know you're shocked that the New York Times is defending Hillary Clinton, but on this subject. Now, listen, the background for this is we know all about all the email disclosures, and it's clear what is happening with her. She says one thing in private and another thing in public. Right. Now, most of us would call that hypocrisy. And we would say that's not really a good thing. You're not really a real person if you do that. You might even be a sociopath. So here's the editorial this morning. It says, why Hillary Clinton needs to be two-faced. It's done in politics. You sometimes have to be a hypocrite. Now, why is there... I have to be careful how I use certain terms because we have an English teacher here, and I know she'll correct me if I... That would seem to be, given the way they attack Donald Trump for being two-faced or inconsistent, this would seem to meet the definition of irony, I think. Here's Hillary at the Alfred Smith dinner the other night. It's a very short clip. Be patient. It's a dinner put on by the Alfred Smith Foundation. He ran it for president. He was two-term governor of New York. He ran for president against Herbert Hoover in 1928 and lost. And he was a Catholic. And the foundation has for years, I don't know when they started it, but for over 50 years, every time there's a presidential election, the last joint appearance of the two candidates before the election takes place is at the Alfred Smith dinner at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. I mean, I could show you pictures of Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy with the then cardinal that was the Archbishop of New York at the dinner in 1960. I remember, I don't know why I remember stuff like this, but there was sort of a famous back and forth between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan in the 1980 campaign. By the way, at this point in the campaign, the polls, the main poll, Gallup poll, showed Ronald Reagan down 8 points to Jimmy Carter at this point in the campaign. But Reagan made the comment about Jimmy Carter got a little bit snarky. Not supposed to be snarky, but you know, it's a hard-fought campaign. And he said that something about Reagan's age. And I think you remember Reagan in one of his debates with Mondale said that he would forgive, you know, people for not wanting to vote for Mondale because of his youthfulness or something like that. And he said something about, well, Jimmy said, the joke was Jimmy said that you always look younger. You ride these horses and you keep looking younger and younger. And he says, well, I just keep riding older horses. And, it was a great comeback because it was kind of self-deprecating. And I think it was really kind of a pivotal thing in the campaign that really turned a lot of people over to Reagan. But so Reagan went to this dinner, and there's pictures of him with the cardinal, and Jimmy Carter. And so this is a traditional thing. It's sponsored by the Alfred Smith Foundation, and it raises for Catholic charities. So here's Hillary. She's going to talk about, well, you'll hear what she talks about.
I believe how we treat others is the highest expression of faith and of service. Now, I'm not Catholic, I'm a Methodist, but one of the things that we share is the belief that in order to achieve salvation, we need both faith and good works. And you certainly don't need to be Catholic to be inspired by the humility and heart of the Holy Father, Pope Francis.
So, faith and works. Okay? So, listen, I actually agree with her that that's what Methodists and Catholics teach. And that's not the gospel. Now, I don't have any comments of Mr. Trump, because he was kind of snarky in his comments, let's be honest. But, and she was too. But the stunning thing was the comments made by Cardinal Timothy Dolan right at the end of the evening. And I want you to listen to these. This is stunning to me because this has huge prophetic implications.
And the other person who is really here with us this evening, the Lord. He's told us in the scriptures that we Jews and Christians and Muslims cherish that he's in the event, he's in the midst of any event characterized by love, care, concern, and service. His son Jesus is here in our midst. His bride, the church, is honored to host an event affirming the dignity of the human person and the sacredness of all human life.
It's interesting, one, about the sacredness of human life. He says that next to a candidate who has just come out and announced her support for late-term partial birth abortion, where they suck the brains out of the kid and yank them out backwards, and sometimes alive, and so they kill them. And she supports that. Everybody who thinks she's a saint needs, to me, that's sort of like, that issue is pretty easy to decide. But this Muslim, Jew, Christian, Jesus is in the midst of them. I guess my question would be, which Jesus? I heard that and I went, whoa. I mean, that is the essence of what this coming one world religion is right there. And it's not coming. It's here. It just hasn't reached its full bloom yet. So there were other disclosures this week. I have a little bit of a clip. I'm going to play it just because I think it's kind of important to show that we have major problems in our politics. We know about the Project Veritas disclosures. The head of one of the Democratic operative organizations that's working with the DNC. Now I'm going to forget the guy's name. Kramer, Bob Kramer. Kramer. Not the Seinfeld Kramer. Although the way things are going, this is sort of a really black comedy. Here's an interview with Megyn Kelly and Donna Brazile, head of the DNC, about some of this. And listen, I have taken I'm a trial lawyer. And one of the things as a trial lawyer that you have to do is you have to assess a person's credibility on the fly. And so there are techniques that have been developed by CIA and FBI and that type of thing about what to look for to tell if a person is lying. And the first one of these that I went to, it was back about 1999. And so the lecturer who did this, she gave examples of what people do when it's evident that they're lying. And every example she used was Bill Clinton. Okay? So I want you to watch Donna Brazile and see if you can make an assessment as to whether she's lying or not. Now, one of the characteristics of that is changing the subject to something else. That's almost a dead giveaway. So here's the interview.
Joining me now, Donna Brazile, chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee. Donna, thank you very much for being here. So the people involved in that campaign to incite violence at the Trump rallies and make it look like Trump supporters were violent when in fact they had been provoked by these folks looking for a fight, say that this was in direct coordination with Hillary Clinton's camp and with the DNC. Scott Foval, the guy caught on tape who's now been fired, said this is how it worked. The Hillary camp pays the DNC pays Democracy Partners, our group, who pays the Foval group, and that's the group that quote, executes the expletive on the ground.
Hey,
Do you
Kelly,
deny it?
that contract, first of all, that contract, based on my knowledge, I became chair on July 28th. The contract that is...
Actually, not answering the question is also a dead giveaway.
Allegedly being referred to was not signed until June of 2016. I think all of that evidence is out there. Look, when you have a convicted criminal sneaking around your office with
Okay, so I'm going to interrupt this to make some commentary. Convicted criminal seeking around the office is James O'Keefe. and I think he was convicted or pled guilty to a misdemeanor charge someplace. Okay, so he's a convicted criminal. Do you know who this Kramer guy is? He heads up this Democracy Partners, I think it is, and he works with the DNC. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He is married to Jan Schakowsky, the Democratic Congresswoman from Evanston, Illinois. She's a really high up Democratic left-wing political operative. What else goes on in Evanston? Well, that's where people like the pristine Bill Ayers and Bernadette Dorn are tenured professors, at least she is, at Northwestern University Law School. You know Bill Ayers, the leftist, the Weather Underground, the people who should be serving time in prison for murder, who planted bombs with nails and spikes in them to maim people. Bernadette is a tenured professor at Northwestern. She's a radical leftist. She is a leftist. She is a anarchist of the Saul Alinsky-ite type. And she is friends with Jan Schakowsky, who is married to this Kramer guy. Oh, by the way, while we're talking about convicted criminals, Kramer in the 1990s was convicted of criminal fraud in connection with the way they were doing some fundraising or something. So there really is a convicted criminal in this aspect, and he's the guy who was running the op for the DNC under Donna Brazile.
That try to
Are you referring to Bob Kramer, the head of Democracy Partners?
No, I'm referring to Mr. O'Keefe in the instance that he has doctored some videos as he's done before. But again, going back to the so-called contract that you mentioned, Bob's contract, according to the records that I was able to pull at the DNC, was not signed until June of 2016.
Bob Kramer, just to get our viewers up to speed. Let me just say, I'll give you the floor, but I just want to tell our viewers what we're talking about, because they may not.
Talking over someone is another indication.
Who he is. Bob Kramer's the head of. 1 second, Donna. Forgive me, because I just want to get the viewers up to speed who haven't been following this like you and I have.
Okay.
Bob Kramer was the head of Democracy Partners. This is one of the groups. He's now been fired. This is one of the groups that committed these acts. He's the man who was at the White House 342 times and met personally, according to the records, with President Obama in some fashion over 40 times. He's now been dismissed, but he's the one saying that there was coordination with the DNC, and this is obviously a very well-connected man. He, too, is a convicted felon, convicted for fraud. This is obviously not an honest person, and yet you were working very closely with him, the DNC.
Well, again, Bob Kramer, I went back to the DNC the other day when this came up after we learned that we had a trespass, a convicted criminal sneaking around our office posing as an intern.
One of the payroll.
I asked for the records of Mobilize to be produced. Now, Bob, this was Bob a contract with Mobilize, his group, was signed in June to help us with building rallies across the country, meaning Democratic rallies. So what Mr. Trump was referring to, and I'm sure you'll see the results. That was something that happened months ago, and I have no evidence and no knowledge of that. Mr. Kramer stepped aside because he did not want to be a.
So Megan then goes to her about getting there's an email of hers like the day before the one debate with Bernie Sanders, having the question verbatim, and Megan asked her about that.
This question on March 12th, that verbatim was provided by Roland Martin to CNN the next day. How did you get that question, Donna?
Well, Kelly, since I play straight up, and I'll play straight up with you, I did not receive any.
Claiming that you're telling the truth is sometimes an indication that you're not.
Questions from CNN. Let's just be
Where'd you
very
get it?
clear.
Where did you get it?
First of all, what information are you providing to me that will allow me to see what you're talking about? Everybody
You got the
is
WikiLeaks
leaking
released a
private
March 12th
information.
Podesta email showing you
do-
messaging the Clinton campaign with the exact wording of a question asked at the March 13th
Kelly,
CNN TV1
Kelly,
town hall debate.
Kelly,
Where did you get it?
you know, as a Christian woman, I understand persecution, but I will not sit here and be persecuted because your information.
Okay, that's enough. But then you got to, Joshing Earnestly, our friend at the White House, was asked a question about it.
Project Veritas videos that have been making the rounds of late. Does the White House have any reaction to the dismissal or the severance of two veteran Democratic operatives after the release of the latest Project Veritas videos? In particular, I want to draw your attention to Robert Kramer, a convicted felon who visited the White House, according to reports, 342 times, also met personally with the president some 47 times, the most recent occasion being in June of this year.
And what happened in June of this year? Well, that's when the contract got signed, right? I'm sure there's no connection.
Well, I've been asked about videos that have come from this outlet in the past, and each time I've tried to urge people to.
Okay, see, when he pauses like that, he's trying to figure out what he can say that sounds even marginally plausible. Okay? And you can tell what's going through his head is like, if I really answer this question, I'm done.
Take those reports not at face value, and not just with a grain of salt, but maybe even a whole package of salt, because despite what the name might suggest, these videos have not often revealed the truth.
You do have
So-
some people that were sort of shoved out or walked away based on the release of these videos.
Yeah, and so that is true, and so that's why I'm reluctant to comment directly on the videos themselves. I think there is a principle, though, that I will give voice to, which is I know that there was the suggestion in some of these reports that it might be a clever organizing tactic or a clever political tactic to try to incite violence at political rallies.
Bird dogging, that sort of thing.
That is entirely inconsistent with the president's view about community organizing and waging a vigorous campaign. That we should attempt.
Okay. I can't take any more of that. We take everything you say, Joshing Earnestly, with a truckload of salt. Okay, let's turn to look. I so want the Lord to come and take us away from all this nonsense, really. But we have to plan. Live like we're going to be here and deal with it. So it's going to get rough. This is an interesting thing. A newspaper in Italy, Il Foglio, came out and said they condemn full-page center spread, 2 pages. We condemn what UNESCO said about Jews in Jerusalem. Now, part of that may be that some of the best evidence that there were Jews in Jerusalem you can find in Rome. Go to the Arch of Titus. Did I talk about this last Sunday? It was in my thing. I'm sorry, I was in the lecture I did for that university. Go to the Arch of Titus in Rome. I've been there. I've seen it myself. There's it's Titus sort of self-promoting, proclaiming his victory and taking over Jerusalem and burning the temple. And there in the panel where this is depicted, you see the Roman soldiers carrying away the treasures of the temple in Jerusalem, including the golden menorah. And it's that golden menorah, it is an exact replication of that golden menorah that led to the golden menorah that you'll see near the Temple Mount today to be used in the next temple. But also, it is the official seal of the state of Israel, that menorah. It's an exact copy. Because they figured, look, if you're going to put it in stone, you might as well be accurate about putting it in stone. And here we are almost 2,000 years later, and you can go see it in Rome today. Jordan is having trouble. I think this is prophetically significant. The king is a lot of opposition. The Muslim Brotherhood is rising. And Jordan really has to rely on Israel for its ultimate protection because they're not getting it from anywhere else. Maybe a little bit of help from Saudi Arabia. In the Gatestone Institute, they talked about the UNESCO decision a little bit. They call a good article by Shoshana O'Brien called Erasing the West. She says this: last week the United Nations, UNESCO, voted Christian and Jewish heritage off the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Tuesday, they ratified their perfidy. Having demonstrable historical facts such as Jewish patrimony on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem subject to the whims of the United Nations, in which is the late Abba Eban. By the way, if you ever want to see some interesting, very articulate, well-spoken man who was the foreign minister of Israel for a time and was also the ambassador of Israel to the UN when the nation of Israel was created in 1948 or approved, look him up on the internet. There's a great interview of his from about 1958 with Mike Wallace. He's very articulate in defending the Jewish state of Israel, in which, as the late Abba Eban said, Arabs could muster a majority to decide the sun rises in the West is not a positive proposition. Pakistan, Nicaragua, Mozambique, and Vietnam are not likely to ever vote for historical accuracy on Jerusalem and Israel, nor are China and Russia. These are all countries that supported that ridiculous UNESCO thing. France, she says, is a serial appeaser, more concerned about its back than the truth. But Sweden, Mexico, Brazil, Spain, Ivory Coast, Argentina, Paraguay, Nevis, and St. Kitts, and others should be loath to relinquish their Judeo-Christian humanistic culture, roots, and values to the jihadi pond scum. The question remains how to convince nations in the West to stand for themselves in the face of Islamists committed to replacing them. Okay, so this is a left-wing Labor member of Parliament who came out this week and said that the reason why why anti-Semitism is rising, why anti-Jewishness is rising, is because we're disgusted with Israel. The recent Select Committee report on anti-Semitism is to be welcome, she said, but it would have been more useful if it had investigated the causes of anti-Semitism too. It is difficult to believe that a 75% increase in anti-Semitism, it reports, have been committed by people who simply hate Jewish people for no reason. Not hard to believe at all if you look at history. But to a leftist, left-wing member of Parliament, they don't have the ability to reason. Their leftism is their religion. It is surely a case, she says, that these incidents are reflecting the disgust amongst the general public of the way the government of Israel treats Palestinians and manipulates the USA and ourselves to take no action against that country's blatant disregard of international law and the Geneva Conventions. Added to this is Israel's adoption of the official title, the Jewish State of Israel. How dare they? This conflates Israel with Jewish support here, whether or not they support the Zionist state, and many do not. I look forward to the sequel to this report. Be tough on the causes of anti-Semitism as well as the loathsome sentiment itself. That is, it's leftist nonsense. Another thing geopolitically that you need to pay attention to, because there are all these flashpoints around the world where the tension is rising, and I do think that we are on our way to a war of some kind. Exactly when it starts, how extensive it is, I don't know. There are a lot of indicators for that. I do play golf regularly. I won't identify the person, with a retired Air Force general. And he's a pretty straight shooter guy, as you might expect. And, so we talk about geopolitics some Saturdays when we play. Yesterday was no exception. And one of the things he mentioned was this thing with the Philippines now seeming to go into the orbit of China, which is incredibly significant because in this channel in the South China Sea, between like Vietnam and they're around Indonesia and those places, China's taking over. They're building islands. And the one buffer that we've had against that has been the basis that we have in the Philippines. And now those appear that they may be going away. And so that's pretty significant. Another thing that happened this week, significant geopolitically, is the movement into the Middle East of some of the Russian missile device, like S-400 and S-300 missiles. These are real game changers in the way that they take away American and Israeli air superiority in these areas. It's a very clever move by Russia. I will give them that. And so now we have, well, here's the slide I want. And so these missiles have a range of about 250 miles. So if you go to the Tartus base, that's the warm water port on the Mediterranean that Russia really wanted, probably the real reason that they went into Syria to help out the Assad regime. And I think they also have an interest in kind of keeping tabs on Turkey and Iran. They don't have they've never had historically good relations with them. They've used them, but it's always kind of kept keeping them at arm's length. Using a stiff arm, which I think the Ohio State Buckeyes could have used a couple times last night, but that's another subject. I didn't see it, so I don't know what happened. I went to bed. And but at this Tartus base, if you use that as the center where these missile batteries are, you can see that it covers all of Israel. And these are very difficult missiles to defend against with missile defense systems and that sort of thing. So that is a major thing of a big game changer in the Middle East. The UN is now seeking to inquire into Aleppo and what happened there, the barrel bombing that's taken place there. And it's, I mean, if you see pictures of Aleppo and Homs and other cities, and even a large chunk of Damascus, those cities aren't coming back for decades. If the Lord doesn't come back, I'll probably be long gone before there's ever really much of a city of Aleppo again that even approaches what it was. I mean, it's just massive destruction. And the people had to leave, and that's why I think there's some credence to the NATO general who said that they tried to weaponize humans to get them to go someplace else. And they were mainly Sunnis. They were in alliance in some respects with some of the Al-Qaeda type rebels and other rebel groups in Syria. There are tons of them. And so Russia went in with Syria did it, and then Russia helped continue it. They bombed the daylights out of the place, and people left. And now what happens? They've neutralized Germany. It's very clever. I know a lot of people like Putin. I don't trust him. I know he's down there trying to protect his interests. He has a very difficult situation with declining population and demographics of ethnic Russians and an increase in the Muslim percentage of the population of his government. And the reports I've seen is that 40% of Russian army is now Muslim. And by 2025, I think it will be much sooner than that, it will be over 50% Muslim. And that's a game changer. That's going to change the calculus of what Russia does and who they ally with, because they're about preserving themselves. And they've always been about preserving themselves. But here's just a little interview with David Sater about Putin and the book he's written. Here we go. Okay, where is my... Okay, here we go. Here's the interview.
Russia is certainly front and center in American politics today, especially over the last several days. Donald Trump has said he has a good relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but then seemed to backtrack a little bit on those comments. And this comes amid claims from Hillary Clinton that Trump is too chummy with Russia, especially in the wake of all the allegations about the hack attack on the DNC. Well, while this is happening, the National Review has a new cover story, and it unveils some interesting details about Putin's past. So we're joined by the author of this cover story, David Sater. He's the first U.S. journalist expelled from Russia since the end of the Cold War. We talked to him then when it happened a few years ago. And David, it's nice to have you back on the program.
Well, it's good to be with you, Jenna.
It is quite a story that you tell about a terror attack perhaps being the reason that Vladimir Putin is in power in Russia at this time. Other journalists have made the same claims, and in Russia, some of them have wound up dead. Why do you think this is so important to write about now?
It's because it shows the true nature of the Russian regime, and it shows the true nature of Vladimir Putin. This is not just a corrupt leader. This is someone who's ready to come to power on the basis of the bombing of his own people. And the reality of what happened is actually fairly well known in Russia, although people are afraid to talk about it. But our American politicians don't make any real effort to understand the circumstances of Putin's rise to power, and as a result, they don't understand him.
Can you tell us a little bit about...
And that's why we have so many remarks.
Can you tell us a little bit about the circumstances? And I know you've covered this so much in depth, but if you could, in a Cliff Notes version for some of our viewers, I'm sure they'll be fascinated to hear what you're talking about when you say the circumstances that led to his rise in power.
Well, it's important to remember that in 1999, Boris Yeltsin, who was finishing his second term as president, had a 2% popularity rating because of the takeover of the country by criminals. And he and the members of his entourage feared for their freedom and even their lives. Suddenly, 4 apartment buildings are blown up in the middle of the night. Putin is put in charge of a war in Chechnya, and instead of being blamed for the corruption, is depicted as the savior of the country. And that got him elected president. Unfortunately, there's evidence that it was not Chechen rebels who bombed those buildings, but the Russian security services themselves.
And Vladimir Putin was the head of those security services at the time.
He was the prime minister and former head of the security services, and he was the person who benefited. He was the...
Well, and that's a little bit of it. I highly recommend. He's got a book. I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head. If you want to hear an interview with him about October 11th, he was interviewed on Secure Freedom Radio by Frank Gaffney. I think it's a podcast that I would highly recommend that you listen to almost every day, because Frank does probably the best job of anybody of covering security issues and how we're dealing with these problems. And he has solid people that are fellows at the Center for Security Policy in D.C., and he was one of the big helps to get Phil Haney's book published as well. So here's the situation. Now, we all know about the prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39. It talks about a country from the far north coming against Israel in the last day, an alliance with what, if this happens in our day and age, which I think it's very close to happening, would be an alliance, could be an alliance of Russia with these Arab states. It would be Turkey, it would be Persia, not Arab states, Muslim states, Turkey, Persia, Libya, Sudan. Those are the main players in that. And they had come against Israel in the last days. And the northern leader of that alliance seems to be reluctant because there are hooks in his jaw that drag him in. So people are rightfully paying attention to what's going on in the Middle East, and are we on the verge of the Gog-Magog war of Ezekiel 38 and 39? And there's a lot of controversy within the church. Believe me, I know everybody holds the different views as to the timing of that event. Some put it 7 years before the 70th week of Daniel. Some put it 3.5 years before. Some put it in the early part of the 70th week of Daniel. That's where I currently am, and I don't have time to explain all the reasons why today. Maybe I'll do that someday because of the timing of days and some other things that are set out there in the book of Daniel as to, and that's, I think I can justify why that is. But it's not an issue that you should divide over, in my opinion. It's one you should argue about. And I'm a lawyer and I love arguments. And so people are watching. Now, the problem with people watching is that everything gets magnified, sometimes beyond what it should be. So we have to also be careful that we're looking for things, we're being good Bereans, we're looking at the scripture, but we're also analyzing geopolitical events in a reasonable fashion. So here's what's happened this week, is that Russia has taken its fleet and is moving it from the northern part of Russia down through the English Channel. They were just there the other day. And they're going to go through the Straits of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean. And then the question is, where are they going? Are they going to move it to Tartus, the Russian port on the Mediterranean? I don't think so, because I don't think that port is ready for the entire fleet yet. But they'll probably go up through the Bosporus into the Black Sea to Crimea, to the port there on the Crimean Peninsula. That's why Russia wanted that. They wanted a warm water port. And so everybody's all, look at this. This is an act of war. This is, in a sense, in the context of everything, it is a show of strength. But you also need to consider alternative explanations and whether they're reasonable as well. So one thing that you know is historically that Russia ports on the northern part of Russia get very, very, very cold in the winter, and the ports freeze. And when ports freeze, it's hard for ships to move. So if Russia wants their ships to be able to use them in the winter, they can't let them park up there. And my suspicion is, I'm trying to verify this, is that Russia moves its fleet down to the Black Sea every year around this time. Because when is winter's coming, right? I think the leaves have changed. That indicates they're going away soon, and winter will be here soon. And in Russia, winters are really cold. So I think that's what's happening. The other thing to say, and I know this from studying the issue, is this is the Admiral Kuznetsov. It is the Russia's only aircraft carrier. It is the only one that they have. It was built back in the Soviet era. It's over 30 years old. It is often described as a bucket of bolts. It travels with tugboats because it breaks down all the time. It is not a nuclear-powered carrier. It is a fuel-based carrier, and you can see that's taken off the coast of England just 2 days ago. And talk about carbon emissions, there you go. So I think right now I'm more leaning towards this is just, it's kind of a show of force, but I'm not that concerned about it because the Russian Navy is just, that thing carries 15 airplanes. That's it. And some helicopters and other things. It's not well respected by our Navy, okay? I think that's fair to say. By the way, the United States has 10 supercarrier class, I believe they're supercarrier class aircraft carriers in operation right now. We also have 4 or 5 that probably could be brought back in a pinch. We have more aircraft carriers at the United States that are more effective. They're nuclear powered. They have 2 nuclear reactors on each one of these, so they can run all the time. They have many airplanes, good aircraft. They're pretty reliable. And we have more of them than all of the other major nations of the world combined. Okay, so don't forget that. China, Russia has 1. France has 1. England only has 1 that's maybe half the size of our standard size carrier, or our standard size supercarrier. So when you're analyzing the events, keep them in context of reason. And there's a lot of hype, as you probably know, if you're on Facebook, there's lots of hype about everything out there right now. And my concern is that the hype is overtaking the facts. And so you have to be careful. And there's a tendency, and I could name the people, I'm not going to name them, you probably know who they are. Their goal is not accuracy. Okay, I try very hard here to be accurate about what I say. And I look at a lot of mainstream think tanks and intelligence things and read them to kind of keep perspective. There are other people whose only goal is to get out there and to be the first with the hype. And I have a problem with that. I don't really respect that. So I think we need to be careful and reasonable. I love Amir Sarfati. I listen to his stuff because I find him to be a fairly reasonable, level-headed bloke. And he's right. There is a war basis going on right now in the Middle East. Now let me talk about one more thing and we'll be out of here. This is the attack that's taking place right now on Mosul. Now, the response has been they set fire to a sulfur mine. They've set fire to oil wells, just like Saddam Hussein did back in one of the Gulf Wars, the war after the invasion of Kuwait. But this is from the New York Post, the New York Daily News this morning, that they've killed 284 civilians in Mosul. ISIS did. Whole families just lined them up and butchered them, beheaded them, and whatever. And this is and there's a California naval officer who was killed a couple days ago. And so there are Americans involved in this battle for Mosul, which is ancient Nineveh. And you can actually go look up. There are some prophecies about Nineveh that I think might be prophecies that will operate in our time. I think they're in Isaiah. No. Try Zephaniah. I think Zephaniah 2. Don't hold me to that. That one I will not vouch for being accurate on. But there are prophecies about Nineveh. And if you look at a map of Mosul, what you'll find, here's Mosul, right sort of a little bit towards the upper left-hand corner. And right in the middle, the heart of Mosul, are the ancient ruins of Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire. ISIS, in response, they attacked Kirkuk, which is down, you see Mosul there in the top middle. Kirkuk is down here. It's an oil-producing region. It's a countermeasure that they've done. The New York Times this morning has some good maps to give you orientation about what's going on. And don't forget that just outside of Mosul is the Mosul Dam that ISIS controlled for a little bit. And it's one of the most unstable, if not the most unstable dams on the planet. And if that dam goes, 100,000 to 500,000 people will die pretty soon from the flood. It's never been a stable dam. And if it fails or it's struck by a missile in these battles, it will be very, very, not very pretty. Because that's the Tigris River that goes right through Mosul. In fact, I think on this map, if you look, the ancient ruin, oh, here it is, Nineveh ruins right there. I guess I could use my mouse. So the Nineveh ruins are right here. So it's a very significant city, and I think it does have some play on Bible prophecy. George Friedman in Geopolitical Futures has a thing about the harsh reality behind the battle for Mosul. It's a great article, and what he says is essentially this. And I'm going to take what he says and I'm going to apply it to the USA. And you're going to say, how's that going to happen? Just wait. It'll only take me a minute. Iraq is a very divided country. Dennis Prager on his radio show often shares the story when he was about 20 or 21. He loved to travel around the world. And so he was on a bus in Beirut going to Damascus, and a guy sat down next to him, and Dennis said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm an Iraqi. I'm from Iraq." And Dennis said, "I know nothing about Iraq. Tell me about your people." And the man's response was, "We are the most brutal people in the world." Now, when you tell that to a stranger that you're sitting next to on a bus, I give it some credence. And look, we've watched what's happened in Iraq. We went in and thought that we could bring in liberal democracy and get everybody to sit down and agree, and everything would be just okay. And everything that we've done has failed. When we pulled our forces out, for the most part, left a lot of equipment behind, some of the Sunni militias rose and became ISIS. We created a vacuum. The vacuum was created by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. It's a fact. And in that vacuum, ISIS rose, and now we have this problem. But nobody should be optimistic that if we go in there and we kick ISIS out of Mosul, that everything is we're going to have liberal democracy flourishing in Iraq. The aftermath, and Friedman does a pretty good job of analyzing this in his article, is probably going to be likely worse than what we have right now. In fact, he says, to think of Iraq's myriad factions are about to come together and to expel the Islamic State and rule Iraq with love, equality, and cooperation is a delusion. It is the very same mistake the U.S. strategists made in 2003 when they let themselves believe Iraq was going to become a liberal democracy overnight by virtue of a piece of paper American advisors were going to help them write. The city's religious and ethnic groups are unlikely to unite, even if they are freed from the Islamic State. The battle for Mosul is beginning. It's a time for humility, not celebration. And he's right. They're very divided. Mosul will fall, likely, and they'll be very divided. It won't change. You will also have what James Comey, I think, accurately described, a diaspora, a dispersion of pretty rough characters all over the world. And when you have immigration barriers being taken down in Germany and the United States, what do you think is going to happen? Who do you think is going to end up here unless something is done? We're going to have a problem, and you need to prepare for it. Now, what's the application of Iraq to the United States? I'll conclude with this. You may not have noticed, but our country is very divided right now. It's a little heated, and people are doing the ultimate insult in today's culture, unfriending and blocking someone on Facebook. The horror of that, right? And if you think that we're going to wake up on November 9th or whatever the day after the election is, and we're going to be moving forward with, what was the term he used in that prior slide? Love, equality, and cooperation. I think you're deluded. Because I don't think the world's going to change until the Lord returns. Or if there's a massive revival, then okay. But I just don't see that in Bible prophecy before the Lord comes back. I see the opposite. So I just want you to prepare your minds and hearts that this is what you have to deal with. Steel your minds, steel your hearts, stay in the Word and understand it. And if somebody unfriends you or blocks you, that's one less person you got to deal with, right? And it's funny. It is funny because I catch myself doing it too. Oh, he blocked. Somebody blocked me. I mean, well, that's not as bad as a lot of other things that could happen to me. So keep it in perspective. Keep all these things in perspective. Stay in the Word. Stay trusting in the Lord, and know that our only hope is in Jesus Christ. That's it. And we need to get oriented to that fact. So let's pray and go. Father, thanks for a beautiful day here today. And Lord, we just pray that you'll help us to keep the hope that we have in Jesus Christ in mind in everything that we do. In Jesus' name, amen.